How to save corals? Are the coral reefs in danger right now? And how to save them? And actually the main question I would like to ask, do we need to save them? Let's in this video just talk about corals. What are they? What they mean for the ocean, global ocean, for our planet, for ours, for people. What danger they face these days, and how we can save them if we can. We're all familiar with the beautiful pictures of coral reefs. Even if you never dive and see them yourself, you've seen it in the movies, in documentaries, on photographs. Everybody knows about Great Barrier in Australia, the longest and the biggest reef of corals in the world. And you also know that there's a majority of islands in the Pacific, Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, which are built by corals and depend on it. Corals are actually quite widespread. We can find them in all subtropical, tropical and equatorial areas all around our planet. For today, from 500 million to 1 billion, a very significant part of our population on the planet depends on corals. And that depends on corals as the main food supply for them. Those population that located on the islands, main source of the protein, it's the fishes that they catch from the corals. Without that, on the little islands, they will have a big problem with malnutrition. At the same time, the corals, it's integral part of the ecosystem of the ocean. If you think about the trees and forests on our surface of the planet, they produce oxygen and they're also the foundation of all ecosystem that live around the forests. It could be any forest. It could be northern taiga forest, temperate forest, or it could be the tropical rainforests. The corals are equivalent to the rainforest in Amazonia. There's an enormous amount of organisms, fishes, turtles, stingrays, and so on, which depends on corals, and they only exist because the coral reefs are existing and providing them with nutrition in specific environment. Therefore, there's no question that corals need to be saved. They are part of the ocean, which produce a lot of oxygen, which feed all the ecosystems that surrounds them, and they're foundation of it. Some scientists estimate that 25%, so it's 1/4 of all the marine life, relies on the coral reefs. Sounds like it's something only we go to when we travel as tourists for beautiful pictures and different color fishes. At the same time, it's very important for survival of our ocean, marine life, and us. If you think about what corals do also, there's a lot of islands and the land that are protected by coral reefs. They create the wave breaker. And specifically in Pacific, when you have a lot of storms coming through, coral reefs protecting the islands from full demolition. So what's happened with the corals and why we need to save them? Why they're in danger? It's a well-known fact that in the last 30 years, all around our Earth, we lost about 50% of world corals. Why this happening and why it didn't happen before? Since 2016, there have been worldwide recorded phenomena we called bleaching. Bleaching and when something become white, when you bleach your clothes. That's what's happening with corals. When the corals become white, bleached, it's mean they're dead. The tissues of the organism that live on top of them die slowly, and in a year or two, they all die out. And what scientists see right now, when you dive into many of the corals around the world, is just fields of white or kind of gray fields. There's no fishes anymore, there's no colorful animals, crabs, polyps, turtles, anything like that. There's only this desert of the bleached corals. Why they're dying? What's happening? What we're doing with our planet, with the oceans, to cause the death of the corals? Is it normal? The modern corals around the planet, they were not always been there. There was a periods on our planet when we have ice ages. See my numerous previous videos about glaciations and ice ages. Where corals exist right now, they were dry out because the water, sea level water was lower, the temperature was much lower, and the corals were kind of in a sleep state. Last 8,000 years, since the climate is warming up on our planet, the corals awaken and reestablished. Corals we see during the last 100 years was the peak of the bloom of the corals. However, corals are very sensitive to the temperature change. They depends on it. That's why we can find them only in particular places in the ocean when the sea surface temperature of the ocean is particular temperature. What's happening right now, rather than 8,000 years ago, the temperature was too cold for them, so they died and become dormant. These days, the corals died from too warm temperature of the sea surface. Scientists recording that the sea surface temperature increased during the last 30 years, in places half degree, 1 degree, 2 degrees, or even up to 5 degrees in some places. They're kind of noticing these heat waves going through the planet, from Pacific to Indian to Atlantic Ocean, and affecting the coral areas. And that's where we're finding those bleached coral fields, the dead corals. Why the temperature rising around the planet? There's a lot of speculation about carbon dioxide, the natural cycles of global temperature increase, patterns of our planet and the sun activity, and so on. See my previous videos about possible reasons of the global climate. However, in this video, we're not talking about why it's happening with the global climate, but what's happening with the corals as a result. The corals are affected, and we see it right now during the last 5-10 years, and we can't do anything about that. To understand how the corals affected, we need to understand what are the corals. Corals, it's not just a simple organisms like a tree or a particular animal. Corals are very complex ecosystems. So you have the body of the coral, which actually one that left after all the life dead on the coral, and the one that become this white skeleton of the coral, which you take home as a souvenir if you're allowed to. The rest of the coral, it's this beautiful surface which we observe blooming and have different colors and different shape. This is numerous, thousands of polyps, which are living on the surface of the coral. So it's like a symbiotic life. The polyps are living on top of the corals, and the coral provide the life for them. Each polyp consists of the circular mouth surrounded by numerous tentacles. These polyps coming out at night and they hunt for some nutrition in the water. In the same time, within the body on the coral, on its surface, there's a numerous microorganism with the help of photosynthesis produce nutrition for polyps. And they operate during the day, so they need good sunlight and particular temperature to be alive. Therefore, it's a big system of symbiosis. It looks like one big organism, but there's thousands and millions of them involved in creating one piece of the coral. There's thousands of types of corals that could be of different shapes. Some of them are quite boring, looking like a rock. Some of them as beautiful as a fantasy trees. It is fascinating how such a simple microorganism and symbiotic with polyps, creating forms of life which we can observe from the space. There's thousands of fishes, crabs, plankton, and so on who depends on the corals and live with them. If you've ever been snorkeling around the corals, you notice a particular fish always have its particular place, its house or neighborhood when she lives. She doesn't go to other corals. The coral fishes are very territorial, and they so much depends on the existence of the corals. Corals are foundation species for all the species that live around the reef. Therefore, when we're worried about the corals, we're not just worried about the corals themselves, but the whole part of the ocean, which I already said, it's the quarter of the marine life in our global ocean. So why they turn white? Why the corals bleaching? For this microorganism in the corals to operate, to produce photosynthesis, to polyps to survive, we need a particular range of temperature. If it's increasing more than 2 degrees or so, these corals will just die. And therefore all organism around it, surrounding, will just die as well. And that's what started happening since 2015. We started already seeing the trend of bleaching from 2000, but it wasn't as global. It was just happening in the patches, in the places where the temperature stayed too high for longer time period, usually within the year, which is enough for the corals to start dying. And then about from 2016, we have dramatic periods of high temperature ranges and the die of corals all around the world, even in the Great Barrier Reef, the biggest coral reef in the world with the biggest number of species there. You can see on this image that since 2000, the temperatures of the sea surface start to fluctuate in more bigger amplitude. So we have high temperatures when it get high, bigger difference between low temperatures and high temperatures. And this temperatures difference with the average was too much, significant. So the bleaching started appearing global-wise. There are a lot of information in the web, and scientists published a lot of papers about that. And you can study this or visiting the chasingcoral.com website about information, what's happening global-wise, and how can we help if we can. Can we help the global ocean to recover and the corals to preserve? Although if it's not going to happen in 10 or 20 years, the corals could be observed only in aquariums. The numerous population of animals will die out, and the numerous people will starve because of that. What can we do to save that? Well, first of all, it's the global warming problem. And believe you in global warming or not, you can still have the green approach to your lifestyle. First thing I will recommend to do to everybody is to become vegetarian. All the animals on our planet are already under huge stress, and we're not helping by producing meat and eating it. The water runoff from the agriculture, it's happening in Australia, New Zealand and other countries around the world, they're not helping our global ocean. They also contribute to increasing sea surface temperature. We have problem with pollution, carbon dioxide of course, so greener approach, use less energy and use renewable energy sources. Choose bicycle or walking rather than using the transport and so on. So even little input will help global-wise. Our planet is always been through a lot of dramatic events, mass extinctions, and then it was recovered. So if we give a chance to our planet, it must survive and recover. The problem with modern civilization, though, we just don't give a break to our environment. Next thing you can do is to spread this video so more people become aware that actually there's a problem. And what does it mean? It's not something imaginary or something that can happen in the future. It's already happening as back as 10 years ago. If you spread this video and share it with people and subscribe, more people could see that. Another interesting research been done recently is that we can modify the genome of the corals and speed up the evolution. Scientists noticing that many corals are very adapted organisms and they can adapt to a change of the environment. Same as I said, happened 8,000 years ago when the global temperature changed and the coral reestablished on our planet. However, the problem is that it's happened during the long period of time. We need a long time, several decades, for the corals to change the genome and readjust for changing environment. And what's happening right now with the temperature increase, it's happening too fast and the corals don't have time to change the genome. Some scientists these days suggesting to change and speed up the evolution of the corals of particular basic species so they can preserve, for example, in Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and then the other corals will reestablish around them. How this happening? So the adult coral passed a mutation they have to the offsprings. So this mutation which they get through the lifespan, and the offsprings adapting this mutation and they become more sustainable for changing your environment. We need more time for that rather than we have right now in our hands, because already right now it's been reported that, for example, in the Great Barrier Reef, our holy land for corals, 29% of corals died. We lost them forever. Therefore, if we speed up evolution, we might help corals to faster to adapt to changing environment. However, the question is very, very dubious. Which species will adapt, which not? We're going to lose a lot of population. And another question we have, what's going to happen with sea level temperature in the future? And is this evolution going to help or damage our corals permanently? Personally, I'm not very supportive of the idea of evolving genomes of particular animals and change the ecosystem artificially. However, if you don't have any other choice rather than dead corals or some survived corals, probably it's not such a bad idea. What else scientists do? For example, in Australia, the scientists created the living coral biobank. Scientists in Australia start storing the species in Port Douglas in Australia. They're collecting more than 400 species all around the Great Barrier Reef, and they store it in a biobank. By the year 2025, there's a big plan to build big facilities to store all these collected species. However, collected in a bank or museum, it will help us to have some genome so we can reproduce the corals. Corals are amazing, they can live in your aquarium, and if there's no change in environment, they can reproduce forever. However, we will still lose the beautiful corals all around our planet. It will permanently change the face of our planet. I hope you have a brief understanding of what are corals, why they're sensitive, and what's happening with them right now, and I hope increase the awareness about this ecosystem. Not just because they look beautiful and there's a nice and colorful fishes living around the corals, it is an integrated part of our planet. Even if it's far away from your home and you not directly rely on the corals, everything that lives on this planet depends on it. Thank you for your subscription, and I will see you later for more videos about corals.